Meirc free webinar, part of the 2019 webinar series titled End of Year Appraisal Meetings. I hope this would be the perfect time for such a webinar. I know many organizations are coming up to the last phase of their performance management systems, and many managers are getting ready to conduct the appraisal meetings with their employees. Now, I thought it would be best to focus on one element of the performance management system, which is really related to the end of year appraisal meetings. And for that particular purpose, in today's webinar, the focus really is going to be on three things. First, we're going to focus on planning performance appraisal meetings, and here I will discuss a few things related to logistics and arrangements focused on conducting a successful appraisal meeting. Then we're going to go into the structure of the appraisal meeting. Perhaps we can call this a recommended structure of a meeting. And finally, the areas of focus that a manager should concentrate on during such particular meetings. Now, allow me to welcome each and every one of you who have signed in to this webinar, and allow me to begin by introducing myself. My name is Jimmy Haddad. I'm currently a partner and the Deputy Managing Director at Meirc Training and Consulting. I come with over 15 years of experience in the field of human resources management, leadership, and training. I have a passion for this particular topic. Performance management is something that I have built over the years, a level of expertise, both from an educational and from a practical background. On a more personal level, I'm a father of three, and allow me to say I'm a passionate sports fan and a player. Now, without further, let me refocus on the overview. And let me start with planning the performance appraisals. And I have here a few things that I'd like us to discuss, which are the logistics and the scheduling. So a few things that center or focus around logistics and scheduling. I want to remind you as well that throughout the webinar, if you have any particular question, please feel free to type it in the chat box, and I'll make sure before we end the session today to answer all the questions that you might have. So when we talk about planning performance appraisals, and again, we're talking about the appraisal meetings that happen at the end of the year, one of the first things that we need to consider is the appropriate place. The question here is, where do we conduct such appraisal meetings? Now, I have seen managers conduct their appraisal meetings in their own offices. I have seen others conduct them in coffee shops, and I have seen others conduct them in various meeting rooms. My recommendation when it comes to picking an appropriate place, I always advise individuals to pick a place that is free of any disturbances. Now, when I say free of any disturbances, this particularly eliminates a manager's office, and this eliminates as well a very popular coffee place. Now, the reason why the place needs to be, let me say, appropriate or isolated is because this is an important meeting where the discussion has to really focus on the performance of the individual in the past performance cycle. I always recommend to perhaps book a certain meeting room that will allow both the manager and the employee to have a fruitful discussion that may span to a maximum of 1 hour. Now, in terms of the layout of that particular room, it's highly recommended to be in a room with perhaps some sort of a round table where both the manager and the employee can sit in an adjacent format. Now, I'm sure many of you have watched movies where some people get interrogated, and the interrogator is sitting on one side of the desk, and then the suspect is sitting on the other. In a performance appraisal meeting, this layout is not recommended. That is why the recommendation is a round table where both the manager and the employee can sit comfortably in an adjacent manner. Now, when we talk about the convenient time, timing is also an important element in the logistics and the scheduling. Now, when we say convenient time, one would need to consider whether the best time to do the appraisal meeting is early in the morning or late in the afternoon or sometime during the day. Is it on the first day of the week or the last day of the week, or is it best to be done somewhere during the week? You know, my rule of thumb when it comes to choosing a convenient time is to consider one, the person you will be appraising or the employee himself, and to always keep in mind what was his performance throughout the year. And let me give you an example here. If I were to appraise somebody whose performance during the year was not up to standard and where his score is below the average, below meeting expectation, I would probably want to conduct that appraisal meeting on the last day of the week and sometime in the afternoon. Now, if it was another employee whose performance during the year has been above average or exceeded expectation, I would probably want to conduct that meeting maybe on the morning of the last day of the week. Again, there isn't a rule of thumb. It is just general recommendations based on my practice in the field. Now, as all other meetings, an invitation has to be sent out to employees, informing them of their performance appraisal meeting. And when I say early, the recommendation I always like to provide is at least 10 days before the scheduled date and time of the meeting. Now, why 10 days? Some may say, you know, that's a long time. I really want the employee to come to that performance appraisal meeting well prepared. Now, remember, they have been working for an entire year. I'm sure they've had accomplishments. Maybe they had some setbacks or drawbacks, but it's very important that the employee as well, they come to the meeting with some sort of evidence or proof of the projects they did well, the projects that are still in progress, their accomplishments, their setbacks, etc. And this also gives time for the manager to prepare well for such meetings. Now, the agenda, we will soon see on future slides that similar to any other meeting, a performance appraisal meeting at the end of the year has to have an agenda, again, to give some clear direction to both individuals in the meeting on what would be the areas of focus or the things that will be talked about and discussed in detail. Now, in terms of preparing for the appraisal meeting as well, notice I talk about the performance log. And if you can imagine that, the performance log is actually a repository of both positive and negative behaviors that the employee has done throughout the year. Now, a number of managers probably lead or manage more than one individual. And for them to be able to remember all their employees' performance, both positive or negative, is really difficult. So the best way to remember what the employee has done throughout the year is to keep track of the employee's performance on or through a performance log. So this could be a paper-based or an Excel file or some sort of an application where the manager can actually type or log or add positive or negative behaviors done by each and every of their employees throughout the year. I'll come back to this because it's really important to determine what exactly needs to be logged in that performance log. In the preparation as well, I always recommend that the manager talks to others who actually work or interact with the employee. That way, there will be more than one source of input of data or information related to the performance of that particular individual. Now, a manager may not be able to monitor and observe the performance of the employee continuously or on a regular basis. There are plenty of things that happen in any organization that are not seen by the direct manager. So getting input from others who work with the employee can give more of a holistic picture of the performance of that individual. Now, more and more organizations are asking their employees to complete what they call a self-evaluation. And the self-evaluation will allow employees to prepare for the end-of-year appraisal meeting. Now, self-evaluation is highly beneficial in the case where an organization has or adopts an extremely objective performance management system. So if your organization has an objective performance management system, then a recommendation is to allow employees to complete a self-evaluation before their end of year meeting. If you take all of these into consideration, this will allow you to prepare and handle things related to logistics and scheduling, which is really, let me say, a small prerequisite of the actual meeting. And this leads us into the second point that I'd like to discuss over this webinar, which is the structure of the appraisal meeting. Now, in terms of structure, my recommendation has always been to consider a three-phased structure of the meeting itself. The meeting may begin with an introduction, then the actual interview, and finally a quick summary. Before I delve into the details, the introduction's purpose is to make the employee or the appraisee feel relaxed. And for them to feel relaxed, they may need to understand the purpose and the structure of the appraisal meeting. And the manager may consider perhaps asking an open-ended questions, or maybe breaking the ice a little bit when it comes to the meeting itself. After the introduction, the interview, and this is really the bulk of the discussions, where the focus has to be on achievements, on areas of improvement, perhaps action plans. And finally, before ending the meeting, there will be a quick summary that wraps up what is expected from the employee moving forward and the actions to be taken in the future. So let's zoom in on the first of these three-part structures, which is really the introduction. So the introduction, or the opener, is actually used to establish mood and rapport and put the interviewee at ease. Now, just to give you a small example here, you can imagine the employee enters the end of year appraisal meeting with a lot of nervousness, because we know that the result of the appraisal meeting will have an impact on things related to promotion, might have an impact on things related to bonus or increments distributed, at the end of the year. And for that reason, a manager may choose to begin the introduction by focusing on something that is not relevant to the appraisal meeting itself. It can be a common hobby. It can be talking about the weather a little bit. It can be talking about perhaps a football game that was played the night before. So really, it's about just breaking the ice. And then after that is to outline the purpose of the appraisal meeting. And if I want to outline the purpose in one sentence, I would say that the appraisal meeting purpose is to identify the achievements done by an employee in a given year and highlight potential areas of improvement. And once this is done, the manager may also provide a general highlight on either the benefits and or the actual structure of the meeting itself, where a reference could be made to the actual areas that will be covered in the interview. And once this is done, then we can proceed to the actual bulk, which is the interview part of the appraisal meeting. Now, when I say proceed, normally the introduction or the opener of the appraisal meeting takes only a couple of minutes. So if I were to put a certain figure on that, I would say anywhere between 2 to 4 minutes. The interview part of the appraisal meeting is the most important. And notice here, I'd like managers to begin with highlighting the achievements against previously set objectives. There are plenty of performance management systems that are used by various organizations. And when I say achievements against previously set objectives, the reference here is to highlight either the SMART objectives or goals that were achieved, or the key performance indicators that the employee was able to achieve in that performance cycle. So here the focus is on strictly the objectives or KPIs that the employee was able to either achieve or exceed during that performance cycle. After that, the manager may begin to identify and explore the areas where the objectives have not been met. Now, when I say areas where the objectives have not been met, again, the focus here is on either the SMART objectives or the key performance indicators that have not been met. So if you were to consider this logically, the manager would start with the objectives and KPIs that the employee achieved, and that they will segment or proceed to the objectives and the KPIs that the employee was not able to achieve in a given year. This is followed by a discussion on the employee's strengths and weaknesses. Now, strengths and weaknesses can be interpreted in many different ways. I prefer to focus in this particular section on the competencies that are required, or the competencies that the employee was able to achieve in a given year, or the competencies that are strength for a particular employee, and then discuss the competencies that the employee needs to improve. So assume your organization has a performance management system that measures the performance of employees on SMART objectives and competencies. Then the recommendation in the actual interview is to begin by highlighting the SMART objectives that were achieved, proceed to the SMART objectives that were not achieved, then proceed to the competencies that were strengthened in the employee throughout the year, and then proceed to the competencies that were a weakness in the employee throughout the year. Now, when this is done, then the discussion may proceed to identifying problem areas. Now, problem areas could be areas where certain objectives were not met, or it could be areas where competencies were weak. And more important than identifying what these are is really trying to come up with solutions or agreeing on solutions to such problem areas, like action plans. It is one thing for an employee to know that they're weak in communication skills, but it is more important for that particular employee to really know and understand what would be a solution for that particular weakness. A solution may be agreeing on potential training required. So if an employee is weak in communication skills, perhaps a solution would be in attending a course on communication skills, or getting coached on communication skills, or perhaps reading a certain book on that particular topic. So it is the responsibility of the manager to really discuss the problem areas and agree with the employee on particular solutions. Once this is done, The employee and the manager may identify more than one problem area, more than one solution to each problem area, and agree on more than one potential training required. When this is done, then the discussion may proceed to any other aspects of the job. And this would be more of an open discussion that both of the individuals can have related to the job. The last part, or the third part of the structure, is really about the summary. And when we talk about the summary, the focus here is to really wrap up the meeting or the end of year appraisal meeting. To wrap this up, there needs to be a summary of what is expected from the employee. So here is where the manager actually summarizes the expectations moving forward. Again, in the example of a weakness in communication skills, one of the elements to wrap up with would be what is expected from the employee, what's expected from the employee to do when it comes to improving their communication skills. Now, notice the second bullet point here is to summarize what is the action to be taken by the manager or the appraiser. There are action items to be taken by the employee, but there is support that needs to be given by the manager as well. And that needs to be highlighted. Perhaps the manager needs to seek approval from the training department on a particular course. So this would be highlighting what are the action items to be taken by the manager. And finally, there needs to be some sort of a formality in writing up the results or completing the various forms if it is paper-based, or completing the various requirements within the organization's human resources information system as per the various organizations. So this, in essence, gives us a general overview on the structure of an effective appraisal meeting, which I sometimes call a three-legged table, or an approach that has three structures: an introduction or an opener, the actual interview or discussion, and finally the summary or wrap-up. Keep those in mind next time you conduct your own end of year appraisal meetings. Now, the final element I'd like to focus about in this webinar is concerning the areas of focus in the actual meeting. And when we talk about the areas of focus in the end of year appraisal meeting, I want to leave you with this. Truth is not subjective. And what is meant here is that the areas of focus in the performance appraisal meeting should really be on objective measures or objective and observable behaviors that the manager has seen and recorded in their performance log throughout the year. Now, the reason why these should be the areas of focus is because those meetings should be as objective as can be. Now, for organizations who have a very objective component or criteria of key performance indicators, then that part of the discussion in the appraisal meeting should be extremely, extremely objective. And let me give you an example here. If I personally weigh 84 kilograms, and if I were to step on a scale, both myself, my manager, employees working for me, clients, family members, they can all take a peek at the scale, and we can all agree that my weight is actually 84 kilograms. With that same notion, if we're using key performance indicators or really smart objectives to measure performance of employees, then that discussion will be extremely, extremely objective. Now, vis-a-vis the competencies, if organizations are using some of their criteria related to competencies, then having behavioral indicators as part of a competency dictionary would allow the discussion to also be extremely objective. So as I end this webinar, I want to ask you to keep these three elements in mind. Do consider planning your performance appraisal meetings, and in this regard, focus on things related to logistics and things related to scheduling. Some of the questions you have to ask is, when is the best time to conduct an appraisal meeting? What is the ideal setup of the meeting room? When to send the invitation? Then once you are in the meeting, make sure that you are prepared to structure the appraisal meeting, taking into consideration three basic yet effective elements: the introduction or the opener, the interview or the meeting, or the discussion, and finally the summary or the conclusion. And make sure that you always focus on objective measures throughout the meeting. Having said that, I would ask you to perhaps explore more this topic. We at Meirc have a public course that's titled Performance Management, Setting Objectives and Conducting Appraisals, that would be delivered twice in 2020 in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, once in March and once in November. I highly recommend that you go to meirc.com and explore the learning objectives and the outline of this particular course. Before I wrap up this webinar, if you have any additional questions, make sure you send them to me in the chat box. At the same time, we will be sending a copy, an electronic copy of the slides used today to all those who logged in to the webinar. So expect to receive an electronic copy of the slides. I want to thank you all for your attention today, and I wish you all the best of luck in your next end of year appraisal meetings. Thank you and talk soon.
Meirc.com